You ever wonder if maybe, just maybe, some of the old myths were true? Well, today we are diving into one of the most stubborn stories in all of human history, the legend of ancient giants. I mean, this is a story that pops up everywhere, in sacred texts, in local folklore, told by cultures that were separated by entire oceans. So let's get into it. Okay, let's just cut right to the chase. The big question, the one that hangs over this whole topic, is simple. Were there ever actually giants walking the earth? I know. It sounds like something straight out of a fairy tale, right? But here's the crazy thing. When you start digging into the past, you find that a shocking number of ancient cultures, many of whom had zero contact with each other, all seem to have the exact same, very confident answer to that question. For a lot of people, this whole story starts right here, with one of the most debated and mysterious lines in the entire Bible. Genesis 6 is pretty explicit about it. It says, flat out, that giants were on the earth and that they were the children of the sons of God and human women. The word they actually use in the original Hebrew is Nephilim, and this is where things get really fascinating. See, the word itself is a huge mystery. Nobody can seem to agree on what it means. Sure, it's been translated as giants, but it's also been translated as watchers, mighty men, and even fallen angels. That confusion alone tells you these weren't supposed to be simple creatures. And it turns out the Bible isn't the only ancient source that talks about this. The Book of Enoch, this incredible text they found with the Dead Sea Scrolls, basically takes those few lines from Genesis and blows them wide open, giving us a much more detailed and frankly a much more dramatic version of the story. And this is where you really see the connection. Genesis calls them the sons of God. The Book of Enoch calls them the Watchers. Different names, yeah, but the story is identical. A bunch of divine beings come down to Earth, take human wives, and the result is a race of giants. And we're not talking about gentle giants here. Oh no, the Book of Enoch paints this absolutely horrifying picture of them. They were violent, they were vicious, they were cannibals who turned against everything and everyone, even eating each other. This was a total corruption of the natural order. Now, here is the absolute kicker. This origin story, the whole divine beings plus mortals equals giants thing, it is not unique at all. In fact, it's a pattern that you find in myths literally all over the planet. I mean, just take a look. In Greek myths, you've got the Titans, born from the gods. In Norse stories, gods and giantesses have these monstrous kids. You see the same pattern again and again in Sumerian stories, Zoroastrian stories. It's unmistakable. It's the same formula. And this pattern even made its way to the Americas. So many Native American traditions, from the Chippewa and the Ho-Chunk to the Tuscarora, tell stories about these ancient races of giants, who they say were the first ones on the continent. Some of the legends even talk about cannibalistic giants who came from across the ocean. And just like their origin stories are bizarrely similar, so are their endings. The narrative almost always follows the same three-step playbook. 1, the giants get totally out of control and destructive. 2, some higher power, a god or a great spirit, gets fed up and hits the reset button with a great flood. And 3, the world gets repopulated by regular old humans. But wait, there's a twist. At least in the biblical tradition, the flood wasn't the end of the story. The text says there were giants on the earth in those days and also after that. It suggests new races of giants, the Rephaim, the Anakim, popped up after the flood, keeping the whole conflict going. So all of this leads us to the question you're probably asking yourself right now. Are these just cool stories? Myths that ancient people made up to explain big ruins or natural disasters? Or, as some of these sources claim, is there any actual physical evidence? All right, let's look at the alleged evidence. We can start with a name you probably know, Goliath. The Bible says he was about 11 feet tall. To put that in perspective, that's almost 2 Michael Jordans stacked on top of each other. But believe it or not, the claims get much, much wilder than that. For instance, there's the report from an explorer in the Grand Canyon who claimed to have found remains of giants who were an incredible 18 feet tall. And then we have maybe the most extreme claim of all, coming out of France back in the 1400s. They supposedly dug up a skeleton that measured a mind-boggling 23 feet. Can you even picture that? And these aren't just a few isolated reports either.
Claims of finding giant skeletons have come from all over the globe. We're talking about burial mounds in the Ohio Valley, caves in Death Valley, all the way over in the Euphrates Valley in Turkey, Switzerland, and even down in Australia.
And get this, at some of these sites, they supposedly found more than just bones. There were reports of massive tools, like hand axes and clubs, with some of them weighing up to 36 pounds. I mean, think about that. An average person couldn't even wield something like that, let alone use it as a tool.
So when you just step back and look at the whole thing, from the most ancient sacred texts to the folklore of people all over the world to all of these alleged archaeological finds, a really stunning pattern emerges. The core story is just incredibly, remarkably consistent.
And that leaves us with one last massive question. Is this all just the biggest coincidence in human history? Or is there something more to it? Why would so many different cultures, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, all end up telling the exact same impossible story?